Okay, I have with me a friend of the channel, Stephanie Davies today, who most of you, almost all of you will probably know by now, as a senior coroner's officer at Cheshire Police and worked on the Lucy Letby case. However, today we're not primarily going to discuss the Lucy Letby case because there has been a recent documentary on the what are referred to as the Wilmslow cases, or sometimes the Silver Killer. And we're going to discuss those because Stephanie is something of an expert on these cases. And she sent me some preparatory documents, so I've read those and have some rudimentary understanding. But before we begin, I want to make it clear that I don't know very much about this case, and certainly not very much compared to Stephanie. Um, so yeah, firstly, hello to Stephanie, and thanks for joining us again.
Hiya. Hi, everybody.
Good to have you here. Now, we're going to talk about these cases in depth, and your concerns about them. But firstly, you sent me a book. I've forgotten who wrote that book.
So, David Collins, the
David
Sunday
Collins.
Times journalist that broke the story in 2020.
Yeah. So that was a very good book. I mean, I didn't have time to read the whole thing, but I've skimmed it. And there was an interesting passage. So Stephanie features prominently in this book, and there was an interesting passage where um, David Collins is talking about how some of your friends would ask you, "Don't you find your job a bit depressing?" And then it says you would tell them it had the opposite effect on you. It made you appreciate how precious life is and how it's important to make every single day count. So I've heard you talk about this before, and I thought it was really interesting. Um, so I wondered if you could just reflect on that firstly, because I think that's an interesting aspect of the whole thing.
Yeah, so I started as a coroner's officer in 2006, so 20 years ago. And naturally, part of the job is to deal with death all the time. So I first worked for Thames Valley Police, and that was very hands-on. So I was going to scenes, I was on call, I was doing identifications of families. So I was thrown right in the deep end, and I had to really learn quickly. And you are faced with a lot of trauma and other people's grief. And a lot of people did say to me, "Don't you find it depressing being around death all the time?" And and I said, actually, no, because it's taught me how valuable life is and how fragile life is and how, one day you can just be going about your normal routine. You've got your life plan ahead of you. You might be planning to go to university or to get married or to do your dream job or to retire. You got that all set out. And then suddenly, almost like an act of fate or something, that's it. Your life is over. So your life plan is no more. And then you're left with the grief of the bereaved. And you're there, you're trying to guide those people through the worst time of their life and explain how their loved ones died. And it can be really difficult if the death was preventable. So, that I mean, coroners do have that duty to try and prevent future deaths if they identify a problem, like a procedural problem. But it does also take a certain psychology, I think, to be able to deal with being around that all the time. But the effect it had on me is that it didn't traumatize me. It just made me realize how valuable life is. And I'm quite an empathetic person anyway, but I really I don't know, I built up a good rapport with families and just trying to find those answers for them. That was such an important thing, and the job became rewarding as a result.
Hmm. That's very interesting. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about before we talk about these cases in Wilmslow is Nicholas Rheinberg. So he's mentioned in this book. He was involved in the Lucy Letby case indirectly. He's the coroner for Cheshire. So I wondered if you have any reflection on him and working with him.
Yeah, Mr. Rheinberg, brilliant coroner, very spot on with the law. He joined Cheshire. I think it might have been when the second Wilmslow case happened. So it was in the late 90s. So he didn't deal with the first Wilmslow case, but he did deal with the second Wilmslow case, and he was reliant on the narrative that Cheshire Police gave to him so that he could bring back his conclusion. But as a coroner, yeah, so much respect for him. If he, yes, like as part of the coroner's role is to try to prevent future deaths if there's a problem. So if he found any hint of a problem, and I guess I'm talking a little bit about the Lucy Letby case here. If he found anything that was potentially wrong, he would want further investigation into it. And he was the coroner that said he wanted all deaths of children to be reported to him, whether it's natural causes or not. So very on the ball, very. He also had a really quirky sense of humour. So those that didn't know him didn't quite get it, but it was part of his charm, really. And it was a privilege to work for him because we worked to the direction of the coroner, even though we were employed by the police. So yeah, he retired in I remember it's 10th of March 2017. And then Mr. Moore took over from Mr. Rheinberg. But yeah, fond memories of working with Mr. Rheinberg.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. So we're going to talk now about these work cases in Wilmslow. And we both know this area quite well. So I wanted to ask you firstly, for other people that don't, the kind of nature of the area and what it's like and the kind of socioeconomic status and so on.
Yeah, so I actually lived in Wilmslow. I grew up in Wilmslow. So I was in Wilmslow at least when the first case happened. The second case, I was at university in Liverpool by then. And it is quite a leafy suburban area. Footballers live there. And in terms of crime, you're looking more like high value burglaries, if anything, not serial killers. But then Sally Clark was from Wilmslow as well. So I think Wilmslow has probably been put on the map for maybe the wrong reasons. But yeah, it's not quite a village. It's not a city. It's like a small town. And I do have fond memories living there. But it's been a long time since I was in Wilmslow. But it's coincidental that these cases happen to have happened in Wilmslow. It's got nothing to do with the fact I used to live there. Um, so yeah, I think some people will have heard of it, but mainly because of the footballers and some actors that live there.
Yeah, I mean, I used to live 2 miles away as well, so I spent quite a bit of time there. I suppose the most famous person that lives there is Sir Alex Ferguson, uh,
Yeah.
but there's quite a few others as well. Um, so let's talk about the actual cases. So firstly, could you give us the basic background and details on what occurred in this case that's featured in the documentary?
So two cases happened in Wilmslow, so within 2 miles of each other, and there was a 3 year gap between them. So the first one was in 1996, the second one 1999. So you got the Ainsworth 96, and then you got the Wards in 99. And they were both elderly couples, but whilst they were elderly, they were still very independent. So they didn't have any chronic illnesses. There was nothing terminal going on in their lives at the time. And they were both couples were found dead, lying side by side on the marital bed, wearing pajamas. And there were similarities with both cases. But it was my predecessor, the former senior coroner's officer for Cheshire before I took over. Um, she highlighted these cases to me. Because of my background in forensics and doing training in bloodstain pattern analysis, she said, "Steph, would you mind just having a look at these cases?" She definitely did not ask me to write a report. That was all me. She just wanted, I don't know, she just wanted somebody with a bit of a forensic eye just to have a look and just to see if she was barking up the wrong tree or not. And she did show me some scene photographs of the Ainsworths. And this is where I do sound a little bit like Dowie Evans, but I spotted within minutes that the blood stain distribution didn't look right. And I remember saying to my predecessor, that man did not murder his wife. The blood staining is wrong. There's gravitational blood stains on his pajamas, which could be that he was lying down at the time his wife was murdered. But with the second case, I thought that it surely can't be a coincidence. That probably is a genuine murder suicide because it was such a detailed police investigation. So I was expecting, and then I looked at these two cases, I was expecting to say to my predecessor, I agree with you for the first one, but I don't agree with you for the second one. And because I think the first one was in isolation, I think we let it go. There's no risk to the public now. That was my plan. But it obviously didn't go that way when I actually got down to reviewing both cases. So yeah, essentially, I will ramble on because there's so much in my head about these cases, so I will probably go off on a tangent. But essentially, we're looking at two elderly couples found dead in their pajamas, extreme injuries, and blood distribution at both scenes. Both of their back doors were left unlocked. There was paperwork found in both of them, and the females were potentially posed, and I can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But yeah, quite a lot of similarities between the two.
Yeah. So obviously you made this deduction quite quickly. So how was it that Cheshire Police made this interpretation that they're murder suicides?
So the first one, I think it was finding a suicide note that cemented it straight away. They found a suicide note and they're like, oh, it's obviously a murder suicide. So any professional curiosity after that point just disappeared, and they just I think they had confirmation bias. So like, yeah, definitely murder suicide. There's nothing to see here. Move on. Now the second case was more complex because the initial appearances did look like a double murder. And Mr. Ward had what looked like defence marks on his hands. So it did look like they had both been murdered, and Cheshire Police rightly treated it as a double murder to begin with. But I think it didn't take very long before they concluded it was actually a murder suicide. And I question their motive for doing that. And I don't know if it's because some people have started to compare the later case with the first case, and that may have worried Cheshire Police because the first case, I can say categorically, was a very poor death investigation. The first case was. Second case, no. I actually that was much more detailed, and I was actually quite impressed with it. But the first case, no, they washed down the scene even before the post-mortem examinations took place, which you never, ever, ever do, ever. You never do that. So as soon as the pathologist found some concerning marks on Mr. Ainsworth's mouth, which could indicate that he had been murdered, by then it was too late to do a murder investigation because the scene had been washed down by Cheshire Police. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent.
No, that's fine. No, that's relevant.
So I don't know exactly how for the second case the police concluded it was murder suicide. It may be that they just couldn't find evidence of a third party, like in terms of DNA or fingerprints. They just couldn't find anything. And I think there's always a risk of leaving a case unsolved as a cold case. It doesn't look good. And there was a risk, and I can't prove this, but there was a risk that if the ward had been kept open as an unsolved double murder case, there's always going to be those lurking questions about the Ainsworths because the comparisons were being made at that point. So much so that in the senior investigating officer's report for the Ward case, I think it's the very last sentence. So it's been several years since I last saw it. The very last sentence says, "Oh, there was a similar case, and the SIO incorrectly said it was 18 months before. It wasn't. It was 3 years before." But he said there was another similar case 18 months before, but it was reported in the media that the back door was left unlocked. So we believe the Wards copied the Ainsworths. Well, I've had confirmation it was never reported in the media that the Ainsworths had their back door left unlocked. So therefore, it can't be a copycat case from the media releases. So already the Cheshire Police have made an error, but I think they were concerned that comparisons were being made between the two cases.
Hmm. Okay, so I just want to confirm we're going to discuss many of the details of these cases, but I read that your predecessor, Christine Hurst, did share your perspective on these cases. Is that correct?
So yeah, so Christine was the coroner's officer for both of these cases. So she had concerns back then, and she raised those concerns. But for the Ainsworth, because there was no forensic scrutiny, they did try to do some testing, some forensic testing on the plastic bag, on the knife, on the hammers, but it had been handled too many times, so everything's too contaminated. So they also did handwriting analysis for the suicide note. So at some point there were questions being asked, and I think that was because of Christine being concerned, saying, have you fingerprinted the hammers? Have you looked at the plastic bag? And she also found that there was medication at the scene which was not prescribed to either of the Ainsworths. So she had a lot of questions, but by then it was too late because the scene had been washed down. There'd been no forensic scrutiny. The police had locked themselves into that narrative. It's a murder suicide. There's nothing to see here. And I believe, and I only know this third hand, so I can't prove it, but I believe that the superintendent on duty was about to retire and he didn't want anything, left open. He wanted it nicely, neatly boxed off. I'm retiring. Bye bye. Nothing to see here. So yeah. Sorry, what was the question again? Oh, Christine, what
Right,
was
so you've
it?
answered. You've
Yeah.
answered.
So but initially, I agreed with her with the Ainsworth because of the blood spatter distribution alone. That the scene photos told me immediately that that was a double murder, staged to look like a murder suicide. But I expected to agree with the police for the second case. I thought they did such a detailed investigation. There's no way they've made mistakes. But I was wrong about that.
That's fine. That's fine. Um, so I want to discuss the pathology reports, and the fact that they're similar for the two cases. So could you expand on that, please?
The first case of the Ainsworth, and again, it's been many years since I've looked at the post-mortem reports. The Ainsworth, that I think those reports were quite short. I mean, it was a forensic pathologist that did the post-mortems, but I don't think it was a forensic post-mortem because he did standard post-mortems as well at Macclesfield Hospital in Cheshire. So I think that was quite short, but it described the injuries that had been done to Mrs. Ainsworth, and she had significant injuries. I don't know I mean, people, if they want to know about the injuries, they can look it up. But if you want me to talk about them, I will. But I don't know if I should. It might be too distressing.
Yeah,
Um,
it's quite graphic.
it is very graphic. But also I do remember for Mr. Ainsworth, the post-mortem report described how he had lip injuries. So he had injuries inside of his top lip, and that was consistent with somebody pushing down on his mouth. So consistent with smothering. And the words that the pathologist used were something along the lines of, these types of injuries are not typical in plastic bag suicides. Now that was a major red flag, and if police officers did attend the post-mortem, which I believe they did, that should have alerted them that this could have been third-party involvement. But by then they'd washed down the scene. So if I remember right, those post-mortem reports were not that detailed, which is frustrating. Now the wards, their post-mortem reports are very detailed because they were full forensic post-mortems. So that goes into a lot of detail about all the injuries, and both Mr. and Mrs. Ward had sustained significant injuries, both of them had. And so yeah, so that was very, very clear. And then I think at the end of their post-mortem reports, I think the pathologist wrote something like, on consultation with the police, I now believe it's murder suicide, or and that Mr. Ward doesn't have defense wounds on his hands, that he actually did that by holding on to a broken ceramic pot. So it's like the narrative, you can see how it's changed. It was very, I think the scene was very confusing for the police and for the experts that dealt with that case, for the Ward's case. But it was almost like, well, we can't find evidence of third party, so it must be murder suicide as a process of elimination. So in terms of the injuries, the women, I think, had sustained very similar injuries. So the blunt force trauma to their heads, and also they were both subjected to sharp force trauma with a knife. So there were similarities there. But in terms of the males, the injuries were not similar. The Mr. Ainsworth, he didn't have he didn't have any sharp force injuries. He A layman looking at that scene will say it looks like a suicide or plastic bag suicide. But when you look closer at the positioning of the body, at the bloodstain patterns, and the injuries to the lips, you actually start to see this is not consistent with suicide. So those are the things that the post-mortem report didn't actually address very well. It was very factual. These are the injuries, and the narrative as to what happened was all controlled by the police.
Right. So we touched briefly upon the graphic violence associated with these killings, and I agree with you. I don't think we should discuss that in depth. But you did deem that to be significant, and I think that was one of the factors that made you doubtful of the verdict. So can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, so for the first case, there was a suicide note left, which indicated, I mean, we already knew that Mr. and Mrs. Ainsworth, they believed in euthanasia. So if one of them or both of them had terminal illnesses, they believed in that right to have their lives ended peacefully with dignity. And the suicide note indicated, yes, I've given my wife sleeping pills. She won't do the bag method herself, so I will smother her. And it described this, we will be going a peaceful way, but the injuries that Mrs. Ainsworth was subjected to was far from that. It was completely conflicting with the suicide note. There was no evidence of any medication or sedatives in her toxicology, and nor his, Mr. Ainsworth. And the violence expressed on her was extreme hatred. This sort of thing that you may get in in very passionate, impulsive murders, where somebody is stabbed 100 times and, something triggers it. Extreme anger is expressed on the victim, and then there's overkill. And it's like that was expressed onto Mrs. Ainsworth, but that conflicted with them being in their pajamas, having hammers present in the room, having, I think, potentially a second ligature present in the room. So that indicates some planning. But the injuries are more consistent with somebody losing control impulsively. So it didn't make sense. I mean, I'm good at interpreting crime scenes, not just from my knowledge in forensics and my training in bloodstain pattern analysis. It's also because of my deafness. I spent the first 4 years of my life not hearing. I wasn't diagnosed till I was 4. So I had to learn everything visually. I learned to read body language. I learned to read from people and their behavior. And I was able to do that with my environments. And that's how I was able to get away with not being diagnosed as deaf, because people thought I could hear, because I could understand what was going on without being able to hear. And that extends to looking at photographs and looking at blood patterns and crime scenes. And it was all conflicting. There were so many things conflicting. I was like, the official narrative doesn't make sense. It's in the wrong order. I believe, and this was for both cases, I believe that the men died first. the women were the focus.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. So we want to try and break down the two cases, beginning with the Ainsworths. So um, one of the kind of red flags is the personality type of Howard Ainsworth, who is a gentleman. Um, can you kind of reflect on that and kind of comment on why that would make him unlikely to be capable of such an act?
Yeah, the original inquest file did not have that much about Mr. Ainsworth's personality, but there was enough to show he was a gardener. He loved tending his garden. He's passionate about wildlife. I think feeding the birds. So he has quite a high level of empathy there as well. He was devoted to his wife, and I think all the couples were described as being devoted to each other. But I do accept that we don't know what happens behind closed doors. So I don't know. I can't say he definitely would not have been violent towards his wife. I can't say that because I don't know. But from what I read, it just seems so completely out of character that usually there would be some warning signs if somebody has that predisposition to being violent towards their spouse.
Hmm.
Usually there's some warning signs like a quick temper or something, but there was absolutely nothing. But bearing in mind that the antecedent information I had about him was quite limited, the statement produced by the family, I think, was very, very short, but the neighbours gave some insight into his character. And like with Mr. Ward as well for the second case, very similar. He was could tell, apparently you could tell there was still that love and respect between man and wife, even in their later years, and they too were very devoted to each other. And there was more antecedent information about Mr. Ward, but there was no history of mental health problems, no history of quick tempers. I think Mr. Ward may have been quite dogmatic in his views. So he may have had. I've got cat hair. Hi, Kylo. He may have had verbal fallings out with people if I remember rightly. I mean, bear in mind I've not read David Collins's book for quite a long time. I've only been able to read it once because it's a bit too traumatizing to
Yeah.
me to reread what happened to me.
Yes.
But yeah, the personality types just there was no clues, nothing at all in their history, which of course doesn't make it impossible for them to have been violent towards their wives, but it just makes it less likely.
Yeah, that's fair. So you touched upon a hammer already, I believe, being spotted at the crime scene. So you consider this to be an alien object. Can you explain that, please?
Yeah, so there were actually so this is for the Ainsworth, so this case in 1996. There were two hammers found. So one hammer was found in the bathroom sink. It had been washed, which is normally something that an offender would do to get away with a crime, not something that you think a person who had murdered their wife and then were going to kill themselves would be bothered about. But that indeed had been washed in the sink. And another hammer was found on the side. And again, it's been years since I saw the photos, but it's not a photographic memory, but I have to kind of remember what the image showed. And the hammer was on the side, like the sideboard in the bedroom. Don't think that had been used. So again, that showed an element of planning, which was inconsistent. And I thought there's no evidence that there was any repair work being done in the bedroom. It looked alien. It looked alien to that scene. It didn't make sense. And again, it conflicted with what the suicide note said. There's no mention of using hammers, but yet they were introduced, they were used, and then one of them was washed afterwards in the sink.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. So the wife, B. Ainsworth, she had abrasions and bruising to her knees and her right shin. Could you explain the importance of this and why this is a red flag as well?
Yes, I remember they were bright red in appearance, which shows that they're very fresh. And I think I'm sure there was reference in the suicide note that apparently Howard had given his wife sleeping pills so she would be asleep, and then he would throttle her because she couldn't do the plastic bag method. But these abrasions, I thought, had they happened, and I did wonder if she'd actually witnessed her husband being murdered, realised, shit, I'm in trouble here, I'm next, tried to escape, and then was dragged by the offender, and that's how she got those abrasions whilst being dragged on the carpet. Can't prove it, but it does make one wonder how did that happen, because they were very fresh and red, barely any. I don't even think they'd begun to heal. They're very fresh and red abrasions. And I just thought, I the more I'm looking at this case, the more I think the male died first,
Mm.
and the wives probably witnessed it. So she probably thought, I need to get away. My life's in danger here. And so that's what I thought. But of course, it could well be she fell over earlier that day. But then I'd expect it to be not so bright red. It was just, I remember they were really quite bright red, not actively bleeding, but fresh. They were freshly
Mm.
done, and then she's died. So I think probably more likely than not, it happened at the time just before she died.
Mm. And you just mentioned the suicide note in that answer, and I know this was something that you also considered to be suspicious. So can you explain why that is?
Yeah, the suicide note is addressed to the coroner. I've never come across that in my career. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it concerned me because it's the coroner that determines the manner of death. And is there, an importance being placed on the coroner seeing this as a suicide on the part of Mr. Ainsworth? Um, Whilst I did my training in America, so I did some training with FBI profilers and very experienced homicide investigators and those that have expertise in stage crime scenes. And I learned about statement analysis and 911 call analysis. And you can tell how something is authentic or not due to certain indicators. So, for example, in a statement, if there's a lot of extraneous, miscellaneous information introduced, and the emphasis is placed on that, then that is more likely to be an inauthentic statement. And I was seeing similar in the terminology in the suicide note. It was making reference to things. Oh, my wife, she's had this infection. She's staring into the distance. Some of it was actually quite medical terminology, which you wouldn't expect from someone whose trade was a gardener who had difficulty spelling long words. And it went off on a bit of a tangent. I thought, I've never seen that in a suicide note before. This miscellaneous, extraneous information. It's almost like the writer was trying to buy time. Now, there was a handwriting analysis done, and it was confirmed to be that Howard wrote that note, nobody else. And yes, I say it's consistent because there was other correspondence found, which was apparently written by Howard, which was to do with something completely different. And it's consistent with what was written in the note. So I do believe he did write it, but I believe he was given instructions on what to write. And I don't think at that point he knew how exactly his wife would have been killed. So he's gone off on a tangent saying, I've given my wife sleeping pills and I'm going to have to throttle her because she can't do the bag method. I think he already knew about the bag method for himself. But again, lots of alarm bells going off, and why not address the note to their loved ones?
Mm.
There's no reference to family whatsoever in this note. It was all like, this is for the coroner. The coroner needs to be made aware it's a suicide. The importance of that note didn't make sense. And
Mm.
I've investigated hundreds and hundreds of suicides, and I've seen lots of crime scene photos, and I've seen many notes as well. And they do follow a particular theme, but this note was completely, no, it didn't make sense. And then at the very end of the note, it said, we don't want flowers or mourners at our funeral. I mean, you can get instructions given in suicide notes, but that again I found bizarre. You got this disorganized scene where there's some elements of planning. So there's medication left there that's not been prescribed to them. There's a note written, our lives have gone because his wife had had a stomach bug, which she was recovering from. But in the note, it said, our lives have gone. And it all conflicted. And I thought the narrative that's been given by Cheshire Police doesn't make sense with what I'm seeing at this scene.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. That's very fair. So you mentioned the medication. That was going to be my next question. That I believe is called heminevrin.
Heminephrin,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, could you tell
yeah.
us a little bit more about that and why that's significant?
That's a sedative. That is, I don't know if it's still prescribed. To be honest with you, it's at that time in the 90s, it was prescribed to those withdrawing from alcohol. So alcohol dependency, and also it could be given to the elderly if they're very restless, and because it's a hypnotic, it's quite sedating. And there was another like a set of instructions found in the house for the Ainsworth, saying, this is how we would end our lives. It would be plastic bags, ligature. We would take medication. We would drink brandy, and you could see at the scene in the corner. So when you're facing the bed on the left-hand side corner on the bedside, I think it's quite high up actually. You've got this bottle of heminephrine, and you've got two glasses with which looked like they had alcohol in them. So that was consistent with these written instructions. But when the toxicology analysis was done, the toxicologist was told, look for heminephrine. It was found at the scene. There was no evidence of it in either Mr. or Mrs. Ainsworth. And in fact, neither of them had ever been prescribed it because Christine got in contact with the GP surgery, and neither of them been prescribed it. So it was alien. Again, it was alien to that scene. It was alien to the Ainsworth. Where did it come from, and why wasn't it fingerprinted? And it wasn't.
Yes, yes. So the next question I want to ask you, we've kind of explained the nature of this attack, not gone into as much detail as we could, but I think it's fairly clear. So, did the husband have the physical strength to carry out an attack of this nature, in your opinion?
It's hard to say. I think probably not, given his age, but I don't. But again, we have to bear in mind that he had his career, his trade was a gardener, so that comes with it quite a lot of strength, and he may still have had that strength. But it was the brutality of the injuries done to Mrs. Ainsworth which makes me question. Um, so, and again, I don't want to go into too much detail because it is so graphic, but at some stage he would have had to have used firstly a hammer as a weapon, and then he would have put that hammer down or taken it to the bathroom to wash it, and then consciously picked up a knife and stab his wife with it through her head. Um, and, uh, and I apologize for it's no other way of describing it. The tip of the knife, again, there was a photograph of the knife, the tip had broken off. And that happens when you have extreme force against something very, very hard like bone. And I don't know if a hammer was used on that knife. Apparently tests were done and forensic scientists concluded that a hammer had not been used. But I think to force it so much to then have the tip of the knife broken off, it requires such a high amount of strength. Maybe you need to have a high amount of rage to do that. And I do question, with Mr. Ainsworth in his pajamas still, the same person that was devoted to his wife, who used to feed the birds, who loved gardening, that doesn't make sense to the violence and aggression and the rage and the anger that I could see at this scene. So probably not, but it's hard to say. I think physically he maybe had, but I think mentally I don't think he had it in him to do that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that was a major red flag because I know I just could never do anything, like that. I mean, I just couldn't. I just don't have that in me. And it takes a certain sort of person to be able to do that to anyone, let alone a relative and a loved one. It just seems so unlikely. I'm not even sure
Yeah,
if I'm strong enough, to be honest, but like,
you have
I
to have
mean,
the rage.
I probably am, but like, it would take
Yeah, but
a
you have to have
real,
the rage. You have to
yeah.
have that inner something broken inside you, I think, to then do that to another person. And I think whoever did it, I think there would have been psychological warning signs. And I just don't think Howard Ainsworth had those warning signs ever. So
Mm.
I think this was somebody else that did it.
Fair. So we're going to move on finally with the Ainsworths to the area where you're an absolute expert, which is blood patterning that you've already mentioned as well. So break this down for us and explain to us why this is suspicious and why you think it's not consistent with.
Yeah, so I mean, I've had some training in bloodstain pattern analysis, albeit quite a few years ago now. So I did the basic and advanced courses in America. And then for my forensic science dissertation, I studied the interpretation and accuracy of blood stains on different types of fabrics. So I carried out my own experiments and did a dissertation on it. So my knowledge of bloodstain patterning is quite strong. I wouldn't call myself an expert in it because it's not like I did it every day in my job. It's something I could understand and I can interpret bloodstain
Okay.
patterning. So for the first case for Mr. and Mrs. Ainsworth, the key thing was Howard's pajama bottoms, and there were they were quite medium to large round blood stains had dropped onto his pajama bottoms. Now, when they're round, so they don't have the tails on them, when blood stains are round, it's generally due to a 90-degree drop. And if they're quite large, it's usually due to gravity. So the patterning on his pajama bottoms showed that he had to have been lying like this, and then the blood drops would fall like this. And I thought, how can someone who's apparently attacked his wife then have blood blood drops dropping onto his pajama bottoms whilst he's lying down? That makes no sense. And there were also some blood stain patterning found on the plastic bag as well. And one possibility is that the plastic bag was already laid out on the bed. Another possibility is that it was already on Howard's head whilst he was lying down, already dead, whilst his wife was murdered by a third party. So that it came to me immediately. Seeing these blood stains on his pajama bottoms, I thought that he's not murdered his wife, and it's also the absence of blood as well. He didn't have blood all around his hands or arms. The amount of damage done to Mrs. Ainsworth, he should have been covered in it, the top part anyway. It should have been all over here. He had one tiny, trying to remember which hand it was on. It was on one of his thumbs. He had a tiny, tiny blood spatter mark, which told me he hadn't gone and washed his hands before he killed himself. He had one tiny, it looked like an active bit of blood spatter on his thumb. So again, there's the hammer that was used on Mrs. Ainsworth must have been full of blood. It's been washed in the sink. Yet there's no evidence that Mr. Ainsworth has separately washed his hands. There's no evidence of blood staining on his pajama top. It was all consistent with him lying down on the bed. And not only that, also his positioning, his whoever moved him after he died, they left his left arm trapped behind his back. So it was in an uncomfortable position, and you could tell because of the blanching effect. So you get lividity or hypostasis when somebody dies, where the blood settles due to gravity, and it gives like a purpley red colour appearance on the skin. So he had that. Mr. Ainsworth had that on his back, but you could see a white area where there'd been an area of pressure where his hand had been trapped. So that's blanching, and that would have been uncomfortable. So if you're killing yourself, whilst you can get some people try to restrict using their hands so that they prevent self-rescue, I wasn't convinced that that was what was happening in this case. And also, his head was unnaturally against the headboard. It was a very uncomfortable neck position. So that told me his body had been moved after he died. So it wasn't just blood passing, it was other factors as well. And with regards to the second case, so Mr. and Mrs. Ward, so they both had extreme injuries, both of them. And there were two things, two of the blood patterns for Mr. Ward that really made me concerned. So the first thing was he had a pattern distribution on his face. So his face had been in contact with a very bloodied fabric. And the only thing consistent with that was his pillow that was underneath him. Now, he had an extensive wound to his neck, and the only way that the blood distribution into the pillow made sense was for him to have been lying face first into the pillow after his neck was cut, and it then exsanguinated into the pillow. Then that transferred onto his face. But then at some point, after all that's happened, he's then been moved onto his back. So he's lying face up. His face is covered in this fabric pattern from the pillow. So has he somehow survived this exsanguination, which must have taken it must have taken quite a while for it to go out into the pillow, then transfer back onto his face. Has he survived that and then turned himself over and then inflicted another injury to himself, which didn't cause that much blood flow? That didn't make sense. And in addition, when his wife was attacked, she had injuries to her neck, including being stabbed in the neck. There was blood flow, her blood, that had transferred to the right hand pajama bottom for Mr. Ward, and the only position he could have been lying in for that to have happened is face down on the bed with his leg lifted. That was the only thing that made sense. So there's two different blood distributions there that show that he probably died lying face down in the bed, and someone has then turned him over and they've inflicted more injury. But by then, in my opinion, he was already dead. So the blood patterning for both cases, in my view, proves that these men were lying down dead when their wives were murdered.
Right. Well, that's very interesting.
I
So
hope it makes sense. I don't know. I don't want to get
yeah,
too technical.
no,
I hope
no,
it makes sense.
I'm sure it does. It does to me, so I
Okay.
understand. Just share whatever you feel you need to, because it's important to get all the technical details, I think. So we've started to discuss the wards, and one of the things that you noticed is that the file for this couple was incomplete, with important details, artifacts, and even key fingerprinting missing. So could you discuss that, please?
Yeah, so we had two copies of every inquest file. So the coroner had his own copy and he kept it in his own archive basement. And then we, as coroner's officers and Cheshire Police, we had our copies. Now, the copies that Christine passed on to me, there's a lot missing for both of them, actually. So there was even more missing from the wars, because I think, I believe that the police produced their own file and then gave it straight to the coroner without giving Christine a copy for her, for herself, the coroner's officer's copy. So yeah, there was a lot missing, and so I knew I had to look for the originals in the coroner's basement. So I asked the archivist for reference details so I could find them, and I was able to find the one for the walls, and that was a very, very thick, very detailed file, multiple photographs, so crime scene photographs as well as the autopsy ones, done at the post-mortem, as well as lots of other senior investigating officers' reports, specialist reports, lots of forensic reports. So that had everything I needed to do a review. But the Ainsworth case, I couldn't find it. We again, that was a very thin file, but what was missing were the original notes that had been left. And I thought, I can't do a review without everything. I need everything. So that file was missing. The archivist said I can't give you a reference number. I don't know if we've still got it. I think it may have been destroyed. But as coincidence has it, whilst I was in the basement doing, I was looking for inquest files to do with a study I was doing on child suicide, so completely separate. And something told me just to look in this random box that had something like 1985 or something written on it. And something told me just to look in this box. And on the top was the Ainsworth file. And I thought, hang on, this happened in 1996. How come it's in this box? And I don't know how or what prompted me to look in it. There it was, and it had all the original exhibits in it, all the original notes. And I thought, okay, I can now do a review of these cases. So yeah, so originally the files that the coroner's officer's copy, they were sparse, but the actual eventual files that the coroner had everything I needed to do a full review.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, so you've discussed some of the details of the wards already, but I'll go through all the questions that I've written with you, and you can add anything that you feel
Yeah,
you need to.
yeah.
So you believe that there were multiple clues left behind in this case. So can you outline those for us?
Yeah, so for the wards, I mean, the difficulty is I'm not a pathologist,
Mm.
so it'd be easy for people to say, "Oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about," but it's a totality of everything, of all the
Mm.
inconsistencies, and like I've said before, I expected to agree with the police for the wards. I thought they did a really detailed investigation. I mean, the inquest file was that thick, and then there was another file full of unused statements. But the Ainsworth file was maybe this thick, and barely any photographs taken. It was pitiful. It was really an appallingly bad death investigation. I can say that freely now. It really was appallingly bad. Um, trying to think of where to start. So with the wards, so that's what I was expecting. I was expecting to agree with the police and say, look, I don't think the general public are at risk. You know, I think it was a one-off for the first case, but I think second one's not linked. There's nothing to see here. That's what I was expecting. But again, it was the crime scene photos, so it was the blood patterning, which I've already described. And some of the injuries that have been inflicted on both of the wards, I wasn't convinced that they were done by the weapons that had been found at the scene.
Mm.
I felt that, especially the injuries done to hands. I mean, like Mr. Ward, he had, and I apologise to his family for again describing injuries, but he had like a jagged cut on, I think it was his right hand, which could be caused by a number of things. But one of the things is when you try and grab a knife, because your hand is folded over, so you're trying to grab a knife, and then that can leave this jagged cut. So I think at some point he tried to grab a knife, and that's what sustained this injury to his right hand. The police said he sustained the injury by handling broken bits of ceramic pot, which he'd apparently used to murder his wife. But some of the injuries done to Mrs. Ward, I wasn't convinced could all be explained by this pot. I felt maybe one or two of the injuries could be explained by a hammer, not this pot. But again, I can't say for definite because you just never know.
Mm.
And there were other things as well, like the once Mrs. Ward had been killed, she'd actually been tucked into bed. But these broken ceramic pot pieces were then placed on top of where she'd been tucked in. So that made no sense. Like if you're going, so again, it's like an offender is trying to say, you must be convinced that these broken pot pieces are linked to the murder. Because she also had, Mrs. Ward also had some superficial cuts going across her neck, very, very light. And I think that was basically to get her DNA on the ceramic pot so that the police would be fooled into thinking this is the only weapon that was used. I don't believe that. I think it was staged. And if you're going to tuck somebody into bed, why do you then pick up the broken pot pieces and place those over those areas where you've just took somebody in? Why do that? Just leave them on the floor or wherever, leave them where they were originally. So there'd been a conscious effort by the offender or whoever killed Mrs. Ward to tuck her into bed and then place those broken pot pieces where they've tucked them in. That made no sense. And Mr. Ward, he was bleeding quite profusely from his hand injury, yet he apparently pulled up the covers, no sign of his hand injury going onto the bedclothes like that. It didn't make sense. So whilst when you first, I mean, obviously you won't have seen the photos, but when I first saw these photographs, it was such a chaotic, bloodied scene, and I thought, how can I possibly interpret this scene? And the police, they treat it as a double murder. It must be a genuine murder suicide because they've done that lengthy investigation. But it's just seen those very subtle signs. And another thing that concerned me about the positioning of Mrs. Ward, I mean, when the covers were carefully removed, her nightdress, it either had rolled up or had been pulled up, but it was in exactly the same position as Mrs. Ainsworth's nightdress. Now, she wasn't covered when, the officers first went into the scene. And you could see, again, especially for the first case, it looked like somebody had literally pulled it. You could see the mark left on her nightdress. So some people may argue, yes, it's rolled up naturally whilst they've been in bed, but for Mrs. Ainsworth, you can see that somebody has actually deliberately pulled it up, exposing her genitalia. It wasn't so obvious with Mrs. Ward, and granted, for that one, it's very possible it did roll up in bed. It's very possible, but it was just, when you look in comparison side by side, the two couples, it looks identical. But the other red flag for me was that Mrs. Ward, she'd lost a lot of blood around her, but there was one part where it seemed like her arm had been deliberately moved, and it matched identically the arm position of Mrs. Ainsworth. So the left arm had been moved, and the wedding ring, and it was resting on her torso, and the wedding ring was on show, and that was identical to Mrs. Ainsworth, and that's one of the things that told me whoever killed this couple has probably done the same to this couple. So whoever killed the Ainsworths has probably killed the Wards, and they're positioning their bodies on the bed, they're replicating what happened with the Ainsworths. And that's when I thought, shit, this is a serial killer. This is somebody who has got a psychological need to do this to these people. And the focus, I think, were the women. So I think the women probably represented somebody significant in the offender's life, somebody where there's extreme hatred or anger. But I also think that there's another motive with regards to the sharp force injury and potentially sexual, the exposing the women the way that they were left. Again, even in a moment of anger and rage from a husband, would they have really left their wives lying in that position? It just seemed inconsistent. So there are lots of things, and I have to admit, I spent a long time looking at it, and I did submit a report to Cheshire Police in 2018, which they sat on and did sweet FA with. They did nothing with it. But they knew I was going to the States to speak to experts, and I was given permission to do an updated version of my report. So I went to the States. I spoke to experts in 2019. They looked at the original evidence blind before they read my first report. So I didn't want to introduce bias. I thought they need to come up with their own conclusions about the evidence before I tell them what I think happened. Their conclusions pretty much matched mine. They said these scenes are staged. You can tell. There's lots of factors here that shows that they're both staged. And I told Cheshire Police this as well, but again, they did sweet FA with it. But by 2020, we had COVID, so I didn't work on my updated report for some time, and then I put the demands of the pandemic first, and I was doing extra hours helping out Cheshire Police with the pandemic and the coroner, of course. So by June 2020, I thought, right, okay, I need to decide, do I finish this report and then resubmit it? Or do I let it go because things are going so well for me at work? I'm getting praised by assistant chief constables, and my team are doing brilliantly. We've just been told we're all going to get a new commendation. work's going so well. Do I really want to revisit this and potentially ruffle feathers? And so I picked up the crime scene photos again, and I spotted an additional thing for the first case. So I spotted what looked like a second ligature on the floor for the Ainsworth, and then for the wards, that was when I spotted the broken pot pieces had been placed on top of those where Mrs. Ward had been tucked into bed. And I thought, I can't turn my back on it. I can't. These couples have been murdered, possibly by the same person. I've got international experts who know what they're talking about. They've said that they're double murders. I've informed Cheshire Police about it, and they've done nothing. I have a duty to finish my report and at least give the police a chance to have a look again at these cases. And I remember the senior detective that I submitted my report to, I remember I said to him, I can remain anonymous. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for justice. And your detectives can take all the credit. You know, it was so many years ago that these cases happened. You know, things have moved on, interpreting crime scenes and bloodstain pattern analysis. It it won't look bad for the force if it turns out that there was a serial murderer. It will look good that you've now gone out and caught the guy. But instead, I was told I was a conspiracy theorist, and you know, but I still had every intention of submitting that updated report and giving Cheshire Police a chance to do the right thing. But unfortunately, that decision was taken away from me when another person, a UK expert, then leaked my report to the media without my knowledge or permission. And the rest is history. As we know, Cheshire Police then turned on me, and I ended up losing my job for trying to do the right thing.
Yeah. I just I want to ask you more about that. I just want to say before I ask you that I already agreed with Stephanie that we can discuss this because I don't want to upset her in any way, and it's been a very traumatic experience in her life. But can you? I don't. You can say as much or a little as you want, but can you just discuss the impact that this has had on
Yeah.
you?
It's still so painful, and I know what PTSD is like, and I'm sure other people that have had PTSD, they describe it as when the trauma happens, or when the first trauma happens. I had a whole series of traumas happening to me. When the first one happened, it's like my life just stopped, and you remain trapped in that trauma. You remain trapped. So even now, we're what, 2026. I still feel like it's 2020.
Hmm.
I still feel like it's September 2020, and the day of the first trauma was the 23rd of September 2020, when Cheshire Police, you know, I gave them all the evidence of who had leaked my report. I said, I've worked out who it is. This is how I know. You know, they've done this, and all I was doing was trying to get these cases looked at again. You know, this senior detective in Cheshire Police was fully aware of what I was doing. I told him what experts had said. He gave me permission to keep working on my report. You know, he promised he would look at it, even though the first version of my report he just sat on and did nothing. So I gave all of this evidence to Cheshire Police, and then they decided after the media frenzy, instead of because I was told that my job was safe. So they knew an article was going to appear in the Sunday Times. They knew that, and a superintendent rang me and said, "Look, Steph, don't worry. We're putting it down to professional learning. You know, the leak. Don't worry. Your job's safe." So that put a little spring in your step. I remember this person said this to me on the phone, and I remember I emailed my close contact saying, I'm all right. I'm going to be okay. I don't think I'm going to be in loads of trouble for reaching out to experts. But as soon as the media frenzy happened, because I think Cheshire Police expected the article to be on like page 26, like a tiny little box. Yeah, coroner's officer does report. It says this, end of. But it was on the front freaking page. It was on the front page, and then you know, on that day, I got so many requests. I got BBC News saying, "Can you come in for an interview?" ITV News, "Can you come in for an interview?" Daily Mail knocking on the front door, "Can you give us a report?" No, and I was absolutely terrified because at that point I wasn't comfortable talking to the media at all. I'd never spoken to the media. It's something I just didn't do. But after that media frenzy, Cheshire Police declared a critical incident, and I was told that I was going to then be put under formal investigation. Well, I was already under some form of investigation, maybe a light touch investigation, and I was told my job was safe, but that all changed. As soon as the media took me seriously, that all changed and the tone changed. Meetings were happening with my team, but I wasn't allowed to attend. It's like, "Oh, you've upset your team because of what you've done with your report," and I ended up going off sick. But really, I was suspended. When I eventually wanted to come back to it, they said there's nowhere to put you, and too much damage has been done. So I was basically, my last day in my job was the 26th of August 2020, so straight after the media leak. It was September when I learned that I was then going to be investigated for gross misconduct charges, and I didn't know that they were going to come and search my house. I knew that they were going to come to my house to read out this gross misconduct charge, but what I didn't know was that they were planning to seek what can only be called a malicious prosecution against me. So they wanted me to be charged with criminal charges, and those criminal charges were misconduct in a public office and data protection breaches. So sharing information with experts, that was they considered that to be a serious data protection breach. So, and then they produced this search warrant. I found out who had ordered the criminal investigation and the gross misconduct investigation, and for my house to be searched. That officer turned out to be an officer that dealt with the Ainsworth case, but he failed to declare his conflict of interest. And I ended up putting a grievance against him, but he was allowed to retire, so he avoided his own misconduct investigation. But I do question his motive as to why they had to treat me the way they did. And I was very psychologically vulnerable at that point, very extremely vulnerable. I was a suicide risk. I'll openly admit that I was a very strong suicide risk. And they took away all my devices. They took away my personal laptop. They took away my personal phone. My personal mobile phone was linked to my hearing aid. So the phone they gave me was not compatible, and I couldn't hear. So when I was very suicidal later on, after they'd searched my house, I couldn't call anyone for help. I couldn't ring anybody. I couldn't hear on the phone that they had given me. And I did end up with an injury following that. So it was an extremely distressing time for me. But it just seemed that as soon as I knew that they were searching my house, I thought, they're looking for dirt. I've given them all the evidence they need to know who leaked my report. I thought, this is bigger. It's almost like they're personally offended by me raising concerns. And I thought, this is personal. This is getting really personal. And my mobile phone eventually was returned to me, but the paranoid part of me, it kept on randomly lighting up when it was just lying on the side doing nothing. And I thought, what's they done to it? And I ended up not using that phone again. I ended up wiping it completely and selling it on eBay because I thought, I don't feel comfortable using it. And to date, my personal laptop has never been returned to me. In fact, Cheshire Police wrote to me recently saying that they are going to destroy it. It's got all of my past academic work on it. I hadn't backed up anything to the cloud at that point. It had my PhD work on it. It had my childhood photographs on it. It had all my past academic dissertations on it. And I said to them, if you don't want to return all of my laptop, at least give me back what's personal to me. But I've been informed that they've destroyed my laptop. And just in case I can somehow retrieve a deleted copy of my Wilmslow report, well, that doesn't make sense because Cheshire Police have already given me a copy of my Wilmslow report for my employment tribunal. So that doesn't make sense. And again, a lot of it seems very personal. They also subjected me to an interview under caution. Well, two interviews under caution, actually. The first one, I submitted a very detailed defence statement. The second one, and I wish it had been videoed because they did, the two female detectives, they did a good cop, bad cop routine, which my solicitor said afterwards, did you see that good cop, bad cop routine they did? That was ridiculous. And the one who was really trying to wind me up, she kept doing gestures. Now I read body language. That's it's automatic to me. And so whilst her colleague was asking questions, she was there then trying to get a reaction out of me. She was there, responding to me saying no comments, and I thought she's trying to wind me up. She's trying to get me to react and be aggressive. So it makes them look better. And I saw that they had an agenda. And I've said this in previous interviews about Lucy Letby. The style of questioning, they read out extracts from my personal diary. So they taken two of my personal diaries. They were actually gratitude diaries. They were actually 3 good things that have happened every day. That's what I'd written. And one was from 2016 and one was from 2018. So they were not recent. And they were there holding these diaries up, or one of these diaries, saying, I'm threatening to read out all the content, because it was embarrassing and it was all going to be heard by people in Cheshire Police who've got access to that interview tape. And they were saying things like, what you've written here, you can't have been rational when you wrote your report on the Wilmslow cases. And I couldn't believe it. These low-ranking detectives who were suddenly qualified clinical and forensic psychologists who were able to tell me what was going on in my mind when I wrote a very detailed forensic report highlighting mistakes that Cheshire Police had made in their historic death investigations. I just couldn't believe the audacity of it. And I just thought, where do they get off? Putting negative insinuations on things that I've written in my diary years before. It had nothing to do with the Wilmslow report at all. It was unethical what they said. It was completely unethical. And this routine carried on, and my solicitor said to me afterwards, that was a really low blow, reading out from your diary like that. But then I remember thinking, because she was the duty solicitor, I remember thinking, well, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you say something? Because again, I was very psychologically vulnerable. And the only way to describe that experience of them going through my house, going through my diaries, making incorrect assumptions about what was going on in my head, that was akin to psychological rape. That's how it felt. And I'm naturally a very, very private person. And because of my deafness, I'm very, very introspective. So things that are going on in my head, sometimes the only outlet is to write it down, because I find it hard to talk to people. I find it hard to open up to people. And but Cheshire Police took that away from me. They took away the one thing that was so incredibly private. They did psychological rape on me. That's the only way I can describe it. And that left me with long-lasting PTSD. And I still have recurrent flashbacks of them, because my memory is very visual. So I remember them where they were sat in my house, them going through things, looking like they'd won the lottery when they found my private diaries. And when I asked them, what's that in that? It was like an opaque evidence bag. I said, what are you taking? Oh, just things. We'll give you a list. And on the list, it was like various documents. And I'm like, hang on a minute. And then I realized they'd taken my personal private diaries, but they didn't even say or write down that they'd done that, which I think is illegal, according to PACE. So I did ask them, I want a full list of all the things you've taken, because you've taken things that were not covered by the search warrant. So it was then that I started to find holes in their investigation into me. And I read the professional standards report, which was a pile of shite. It was absolute crap. And I had to do my own report highlighting all the errors that they'd made and the incorrect assumptions, things that they could not substantiate. And they were literally looking for evidence to make it look like I'd done something wrong. They were ignoring all the exculpatory evidence. They were completely ignoring that. They're ignoring the fact that We know exactly who leaked my reports, and that person really should have been looked at and questioned, but they weren't. And all the other factors that showed that I was a genuine whistleblower. I didn't set out to be a whistleblower, but it turned out I was an inadvertent whistleblower. They had all of that evidence and they ignored it all. And that's the same thing I see with the Lucy Letby case. They just made the evidence fit their chosen narrative and ignored all the other exculpatory evidence. That should not be legal. It isn't legal. And I don't know how this police force, who are so arrogant, can get away with it. I could go on all day about how I was treated, but I don't want to make this video about 10 hours long.
No,
So
that's fine.
it was horrific. I'm still living with the impact now. But one thing that it has helped almost is that I'm not as naive as I used to be, especially in terms of senior police officers, because it's senior police officers that have done this to me. They know who they are. One day maybe I'll name and shame them, but it needs to be done the right way. And I don't fancy being targeted again by Cheshire Police because they are very vindictive.
Yeah.
So it's something that I'm living with, but I have to say that I don't regret writing that report. I know I did the right thing. I know those men are also murder victims. I know that Cheshire Police have failed to even look at my concerns properly. All they've done is mark their own homework and gone, yeah, we're good at death investigations. We're fine. Steph's off the rocker. She doesn't know what she's talking about. But I'm still waiting for feedback. I submitted my first report in 2018 and I've had jack shit feedback from Cheshire Police. And I even said to them when they decided, the cases are still a murder-suicide. This was in March 2021. I said to the superintendent who had phoned me, I said, okay, that's fair enough. So I imagine you can back that up with scientific evidence and you can prove that my scientific analysis is wrong. For example, the blood spatter analysis. Please tell me who did your blood spatter analysis and can I have a copy of the report telling me how I'm wrong. And this superintendent started stammering, stuttering. I'll have to talk to the gold group. I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say. Just tell me. In fact, tell the press. If you manage to prove I'm wrong, just do a statement, give a statement to the press and tell them this is how Steph is wrong in her scientific analyses. Tell me so that I can stop doing a PhD and I can go back to primary school to learn the basic laws of science, because I'm talking about basic gravity in my report and how blood drops fall due to gravity. So if I've misunderstood that, then I need to go back and learn basic science again. So can't you just tell me how I'm wrong? And no, I still don't know. I still don't know how they've managed to prove I'm wrong. And I suspect that they haven't, and they've just brushed it all under the carpet, hoping that the public will forget about it. But unfortunately, that's a tactic they've tried with the Lucy Letby case, and I don't think they're succeeding. I think it's all starting to be made public.
Yeah. So that I knew most of that already, of course, but that's still very upsetting to hear.
Yeah,
I guess the best way for me to finish this segment is just for me to give my thoughts.
yeah,
So I came into the Wilmslow cases with a completely open mind. I think even a week ago, I knew very, very little about it. And I tried to have an open mind, despite the fact that I obviously know Stephanie, and I think it's probably clear I don't have the highest opinion of Cheshire Police. Um, and I read some of the detailed information in this book. I haven't had the time. You can probably appreciate I haven't had the time I would have
no,
liked to fully investigate this, but I think from what I have seen, it is very clear to me that these cases should be reopened. I mean, I was very convinced by the evidence that is presented in this book, and that is a lot of the book kind of, or certain sections of the book outline some of the evidence that's in Stephanie's report that it refers to as the Davies report in the book.
yeah, yeah,
And as I say, I tried to come to it with open mind. I didn't want to assume that you were correct just because you're a friend of mine and someone that I know, and I didn't want to assume that Cheshire Police are incorrect just because I think they're idiots. But it's very hard to come to any other conclusion other than this was an incorrect verdict and that the cases should be reopened. But of course, that's just my view. But I would encourage people to look into it a bit more, and hopefully, by the time this goes out, we're recording this, as you can probably imagine, before the documentary, which Stephanie seen and I haven't at this point, but I will be watching it. But hopefully people have seen the documentary and they'll, which we believe is quite balanced, giving both sides fairly, which is fair enough, I suppose. But yeah, I hope people will look into this more and give it some thought. I mean, it was interesting for me to have a little break from. Okay, it was only a few hours, and I had to skim through the book, but to do something else other than Lucy's case, which obviously I'm very passionate about. But I think it just give indication of investigative weaknesses in this constabulary, of which we're very much aware. And that takes us neatly on to the final question that I'm going to ask you today, Stephanie, which is on Cheshire Police and Sir David Davies's talk in Parliament. So we're recording this the day after that talk took place. So do you have any reflection on what was said in Parliament?
Yes, such a powerful talk. And I know that those of us that are very familiar with Lucy Letby's case, we were already aware of that information, but I think it was so important to have all of those factors put on record. And it can all be substantiated as well. It's not like it's just somebody's opinion. Everything that Sir David said can be substantiated, and there are real experts who are speaking out. I mean, to have two very senior police officers who have that experience and that knowledge, they're now saying there's something not right here. Now that is massive, and that can't be ignored. And I was disappointed by the reaction from the two female MPs. I mean, I confess I don't normally watch that sort of thing. I know nothing about politics, but I was watching it yesterday. And I just felt like they hadn't even listened to what Sir David was saying. They just rambled off something that was preset, probably written by somebody else. And it didn't hold any water what they were saying. But what Sir David was saying does hold water. And it is so concerning that you got a police force who are potentially breaking the law. Now, what I've witnessed, and there's quite a lot I've not actually said in this video, but what I've witnessed, me personally, I have seen them that they've broken the law. I have seen that. And they, again, they kind of, it's like they moved the goalposts. But we can do this because we're very powerful. And it's, if they had any credibility, they would be able to substantiate how Sir David was wrong and how those other senior police officers were wrong, how they did follow procedure. Well, say how you follow procedure, be transparent. Send us, make public your decision logs, the SIO decision logs, and they've not done that. They kept everything covert, and it's like, oh no, we mustn't share anything. But actually, if you want the public to and other experts and the government to believe you, be transparent. And that's all I've been saying about the Wilmslow cases. Be transparent. If I'm wrong, tell the world how I'm wrong. Don't keep it all hidden away. And they're doing the same with the Lucy Letby case. They're saying we've done everything correctly, but I'm sorry, that doesn't hold water. You need to back up with evidence what you're saying. So what Sir David said was absolutely correct. And I'm sure many people watched it. I know it didn't look like there were many people actually in there, but that's not the point. It's on record what he said. And I think it's quite good timing with the documentary about the Wilmslow cases coming out. This is the same police force and the same attitude, and potentially breaking those same laws as well. And I think it's getting very serious now, and I think that some kind of external intervention is needed with regards to this police force.
Yeah, I think what I'd add is that the fact is they can't respond because they know they're wrong. So they know everything he said is true. Everything is he really was very careful, I think, to only speak about things that are documented. So everything he said is documented and correct. So they can't come back. They can't come back. In fact, one of the ironic things is, well, most of what was in that speech we only know because Cheshire Police documented it, and it's in the Thirlwell inquiry. And then the other things are all police policy and procedure that anyone can look up online. Like Dr. Steve Watts has sent me, paid like enormous documents, PDFs that back all these things up.
Yeah,
So it's not, and these are online as well. It's not like these are private. These are all online. They're all on, you can Google them. So
exactly. Yeah,
there's nothing they can come back with, nothing, and that's why they came back with this pathetic. Oh, everyone's picking on us.
yeah,
No one's picking on you. No one's picking on you. Also, they said they're accused of impropriety. We're not accusing you of impropriety. We're accusing you of incompetence.
yeah,
Those are two different things.
yeah,
Um,
exactly,
and
exactly.
and 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 all the evidence points to the fact that you are incompetent.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
And
I did that tweet. I know you saw it.
yeah,
I mean, I didn't know what I was going to find, but again, I went into looking for the information with an open mind. It says a lot, doesn't it? That when assessed, and let's not even talk about the quality of the assessments,
mm,
but when assessed on investigating crime, there wasn't a single police constabulary in this country that was rated outstanding, and only two of them were rated good.
wow,
So 41 out of 43 are either at best adequate, and most of them, literally the majority, are rated as, either requires improvement or inadequate. And that's their
wow,
core job. And all the other stuff is just like, oh, how they looked after vulnerable people. Now, I accept that's part of their
yeah,
job, but people want the police to investigate crime and deter crime.
exactly.
They
That's their
don't,
priority.
we're not bothered about the equal opportunities policy. No one, obviously, I accept they have to have one.
Yeah,
You can't say that, oh, this is an effective police constabulary because they scored well on this, they scored well on that. Or on the downside,
no,
they were inadequate when it came to investigating crime, but they did well on the other scores. It doesn't mean anything. It means nothing.
exactly.
So yeah, so I mean, Cheshire Police did score adequate for the investigation of crime, but the
Mm,
assessor that did that assessment doesn't know
mm,
what a pig's ear they made of the Lucy Letby case. So,
exactly,
you know,
exactly.
that's all we can say.
Yeah, it's all about context, and your tweet does bring context to it. It's otherwise meaningless. So yeah, yeah, yeah. I could go on about it all day.
Yeah,
It's infuriating. It
it is
really is.
infuriating. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, at least it's infuriating for me. At least I sit here as someone whose life hasn't been directly impacted by it. This does directly impact people's lives, including yourself. And,
Yeah.
I think the most regrettable thing is we can all make mistakes. None of us are infallible. We all do things wrong and we all get things wrong. That's part of being human. But
Mm,
it's their complete inability to face up to their mistakes.
yeah.
Is It's not surprising, is it? Because that just seems to be the norm in this country at this point in time. And I don't know what it's like in other countries, but
Mm,
I think people would have more respect for if they said, yeah, we're willing to take on board some of these points, some of them are legitimate, and we still believe in our investigation, but we accept that, Sir David Davies is a respected MP and he's entitled to make
yeah.
some observations. As an example, I don't know what they would say exactly, but just, oh,
That, yeah.
we're right, everyone else is wrong.
Yeah,
So
exactly. It's infantile. And we're seeing the same sort of thing now from what's meant to be a professional police force. And yeah, I was seeing the same when they were responding about the Wilmslow cases. Yeah, yeah, nothing to see here. Still murder suicide, but not backing up what they were saying. It's
they
all about
even
evidence. They should know it's all about the evidence.
they even did it with those Crown Prosecution Service cases where, even then, even when the Crown Prosecution Service said you didn't meet our evidential test, they still couldn't. Yeah, well, we still think we're right. Well, you're not right. So,
Exactly,
you know, it's
exactly.
just unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the public would have more respect if police forces, and I'm sure maybe some have done this, but police forces
Mm.
say, you know what, we put our hands up. We didn't do this perfectly, but we're going to do better next time. And
Yeah.
I think there would be there would be more respect, but it's the blatant doubling down, these sweeping statements that are meaningless,
Mm.
that, and they're just like throwing the toys out of the pram. We're right, we're always right, we never make mistakes. Everyone else is full of crap, but we're right. And, it's, even after Lucy's been exonerated, they'll still be saying we
Yeah.
still think she's guilty.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
they'll be all bitter, sat in the corner, and then they'll carry on making more mistakes in other complex death investigations. When does it stop?
I don't know.
So that's
I
what
don't
Sir
have
David was saying. This is getting to the point where the law is potentially being broken by a professional organisation, and this is happening, and yet, nothing's being done about it. It it's getting to that crisis point, and I do think Lucy's case will be the case that brings about much needed reform. But it's going to be difficult, judging by those two female MPs that spoke yesterday. It's almost like the blinkers are on. We're reading this set thing. We've not even heard anything as to what Sir David has just been saying, because some of what they said just hang on, that's very well. That's ill thought out what they've just said.
Mm.
They clearly haven't heard what he'd said, and yeah, it's frustrating,
Yeah,
frustrating. But
yeah,
so much respect for Sir David for what he's
mm,
done and what he's publicly said. Good for him. And I think in the long run, I think Lucy will be exonerated. It just
mm.
takes some time to get there. I think,
Yeah,
sadly.
I hope so. I hope so. Well,
Yeah,
thank you for joining us again, Stephanie, and
that's
thanks
okay.
for sharing what I know is a difficult topic for you in many ways.
Yeah,
We really appreciate your time, and we'll speak to you again in the future, no doubt.
yeah. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you.